Hello, my name's Autumn Brown, and I'm a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism and Education in the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, February 29th, 2020, I am meeting with Anita Arnold to discuss her experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Ms. Arnold, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let's just begin by tell me about yourself. Where were you born? A little bit about your family.
I was born in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and I am one of several children, I'll put it that way. Um, I have three children of my own. I was born Anita Golden, so I'm Anita Golden Arnold, and some people have asked what the Anita G stands for. Um, this was rural Tecumseh, Oklahoma. I wasn't born in the city of Tecumseh. Route 1, Box 31 was the address that we had. And the first 13 years of my life, I spent on the farm with my grandparents. And it's hard work. I know what that's about. So I have a great work ethic, which has served me well, in my adult life. I know what it is to be persistent. I know what it is to be patient, and that hard work will get you further down the road than most things when you're working on a project.
What was your community like when you were growing up?
Well, all my school days, I went to Douglas. I went to Douglas Elementary School at Earlsboro, Oklahoma, and that was a building that had two big rooms in it. And they divided us, the first through the fourth grade, and then the fifth through the seventh grade. And that was during the days of segregation, of course. And then when you finished the seventh grade, you were to go to the high school in Shawnee, Oklahoma. We were bused there. But I moved to Oklahoma City by the time I was in the eighth grade. So I went to Douglas Junior High and Senior High School, which is now called the Douglas Next Door, 600 North High. That's where I first entered Douglas here in Oklahoma City. And then I graduated in 1957 from the new Douglas High School, the one that was torn down, that existed up until a few years ago, and they built the one that's presently on the site. So I loved reading. That's about all you could do in the country except listen to the crickets. And I became an avid reader, and I started writing and loved history. When I was at Douglas High School here in Oklahoma City, I was asked by my Negro history teacher to write a little book for Negro History Week. It was a week then, not a month. And that was my first experience at writing a little book. And I didn't know. I said, well, I don't know how to write a book. So he said, well, I'll tell you, some of the things that you need to know, and then you can write it from there. So he kind of, had me divided up into categories, science, sports, music, like that. And then go and research and find out important African Americans, Negroes at that time, in America. And so I did. It was a Black History project, and that was my first little published book, and I still have it.
So that was your first published book, and now you have how many published books?
Six. And now I have been writing for a national publisher who publishes nothing but histories throughout the United States, community by community. And so I've written two books for them. My books are carried in major bookstores all across the nation, and also at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. So I've enjoyed, a good presence with my books. The last two were about, the first one that I wrote that is distributed is Oklahoma City's Music, Deep Roots and Beyond, and it's the music history of Oklahoma City. And then the last one that I did was Oklahoma City's African American education. And I really had to justify that to the publisher because they said, our education books don't sell well. I said, well, you'll be crazy about this one because it'll sell just as good, if not better, than that little music book. Mm-hmm. And so it has been a great seller. It was number 3 on the top 10 best-selling nonfiction books in Oklahoma about 3 weeks after it came out.
Wow. And tell me why Oklahoma's education was so important and what made it so unique to you and to the publisher?
Well, in justifying it, I did have to convince them, but I had the greatest experience that anybody has ever had in education. Mr. F.D. Moon, later Dr. F.D. Moon, was my principal, and he was relentless in the pursuit of excellence, in education. And he was known throughout America. He was he won top recognition as one of the most outstanding principals in America. And so we knew that. We knew that knowledge was power, because we heard that all the time. And we knew that we were supposed to put our best foot forward at all times to try to reach our full potential. That was just kind of ingrained in us, through our education at Douglas High School. It was great. If you went to Douglas High School, you had experiences that nobody else, I'm sure, in the country had like we had. And it was under segregation, but we met the challenge. And whenever there was competition, and our students from Douglas participated in statewide competition, we were winners all the time. We had more trophies than the law should have allowed in everything, not just sports, but we're talking about public speaking, we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about auto mechanics. It was a fully integrated curriculum. There was something for everybody. Those who were going on to college and those who were going to pursue a vocation. And my class has been asked many times, what's so special about your class? Because we had a lot of high achievers. I came out of the class, Commissioner Willa Johnson was a member of that class. Russell Perry, who owns all these radio stations, and he was a member of that class. James Thompson, who owned a science store down on Martin Luther King. He was in art and he became a business owner. I could go on and on naming high achievers that came out of that one class. But we were all taught that we should listen to our teachers. We should strive to be the very best that we could be. It didn't matter about our circumstances. We knew that. And so that's why it was important for me to write that story about our education, because we felt very privileged, not underprivileged. We didn't know what that was.
Yeah. So going back to the elementary school, you talked about one room was 1st through 4th, the other room was 5th through 7th. What was it like being in a classroom where there was that much disparity between ages and grades? Like, can you talk about that experience?
No, it was okay.
It was? Okay.
Yes, we didn't know the difference. We listened to our teachers, and so that's kind of the way we were. And there weren't that many students. Oh. So, even though it was 1 through 4, it was just a handful of students. I mean, it might be 20 in all, 1 through 4. Today's teachers strive to get down to 20 students per classroom, that they have. And we had 4 classes, all 4 or 5 in each one. It wasn't very difficult.
Okay.
So it was okay. And the big kids didn't play with the little kids.
So you talk about you didn't feel underprivileged.
No, we didn't know what that was.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever notice like books that were torn out or?
No, we had new books at our school.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yes. And even when I went to school, down at Earlsboro and Douglas, we had new books. Our grandparents or parents bought the books and we covered them with brown paper bags, to save them. And so we learned how to care for books. Books were treasures.
Wow. And you said your parents and grandparents really pitched in and helped fund some of those things in the school?
Yes, we had to buy our own books.
So how old were you when you became aware of civil rights activism?
I was grown and married.
Oh, really?
By then. I mean, we knew of African Americans who were high achievers, but we didn't know much about any kind of civil rights movement. We knew something, not much, about, African Americans and Negroes who were mistreated. But where I came from in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, I knew that the white kids went to school on the other side of the tracks. We knew that. But we didn't have any longing desire to be across over there with them. We were doing good. And we would meet up sometimes in the grocery store, the drugstore, or the post office, and we knew each other, even though we had these separate lives. We, as kids, we thought it was okay. We didn't, and my grandfather was highly respected, in town. I mean, by everybody. And as a matter of fact, I can remember when politicians, they were all white politicians. We didn't know anything about black politicians. But they would make their way up to my grandfather's house and sit down and talk to him one-on-one to let him know what they were standing for, their platform. And he would take time out of his day, and he was a busy person because he was definitely a farmer who had lots of fields where he raised everything. But he would listen to them, and they were seeking his vote. And they knew that other people had high regard for him, in the community of both Tecumseh and Earlsboro. And so he was a key person, and he strongly supported voting. There was no such thing as don't vote. I mean, he would, on voting day, as he called it, he would come out of the fields, clean up, put on his Sunday pants and everything, and go to town and vote. And he would never think of not voting. And it was instilled in us that we should always vote because the vote was too hard won. And we knew a little bit about the Civil War, when we were growing up, but that's as far as we knew. We worked hard, we studied hard, and we achieved.
What was your grandfather's name?
J.C. Winrow, Jackson Cordell Winrow.
Okay.
That was my mother's father.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the economic climate during this time? So, as a kid, did you ever sense like racial tensions or anything that was happening around you?
No.
Okay.
We didn't. We knew that we were living separate lives, from whites. But we had community. Everybody knew each other. We did things together, and we had, challenges within the family. It's people have challenges now, but they're not the same challenges. But family was important. Uh, our religion was very important to us. My grandfather and his oldest son built the church that we went to, and so as far as being denied, I took piano lessons, when I was in elementary school because music was important, and we did that. And I thought that if Stevie Wonder could write songs, I could too. So I wrote one when I was in elementary school.
You've always just been a writer.
Well, yes, but it was just something that was part of life that we did, and it wasn't questioned. It wasn't so much a matter of what you were going to end up being. We didn't look at it like that. We took it one day at a time. The hard work, whether it was on the farm or whether it was in the schoolhouse. We took it one day at a time, one step at a time. Yeah. And that's how we did it. And we just kind of automatically knew you were going to go from elementary school to middle school to high school. And, if you did well, then you got scholarships, which I did. I had scholarship when I left Douglas High School. The question was, which one of these schools were you going to? And my mother made the decision for me. She put my clothes in the trunk and sent them to Washington, D.C. because it turned out my roommate, who lived right around the corner from us, she had a scholarship too to Howard University. But see, her cousin was president of Howard University. My cousin wasn't. So when Mother found out that, Carol was going to Howard, she arranged for me to ride up there with them. And so that's how I got to Howard University. She made the decision for me. So,
what was your decision? Where would you have gone?
Oh, if left up to me, I had a crush on a guy. I'll just tell you. And I would have been down there in Texas, trying to be near the guy who I had a crush on because he was from Texas.
Okay. So you talked about your experiences in segregated schools, saying that excellence was just the expectation.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
No, always, and and I passed it on to my children. And when they were growing up, I just told them straight up, when they were getting ready to go to college, particularly, I said A's and B's are acceptable. C's you can get past me a little bit, but D's and F's are totally unacceptable. And so they knew that, and so they were high achievers in school too.
So, looking back on your achievements and things like that, can you talk about what segregated schools did for you in instilling all of your pride to then go into the world and do such amazing things with your life and career?
Well, it certainly came as a cultural shock. For example, when I entered corporate America, I didn't intentionally go out to Western Electric to get a job. I was just riding out there with a friend who was looking for a job. And I got hired and she didn't. And so that's when it came face to face with me, about the fact that we were kind of limited. When I said limited, they hired me at Western Electric with an apology. And the apology was they knew I was qualified for more, but they had not integrated the office staff yet. So any African Americans that were hired into the plant, in the manufacturing part. And I got in there, and then I discovered that there was a disparity between the wages for women and men. Women started at a lower level than men, even though they may be doing the same thing. And so later on, when I found out and I was faced with the segregation within the company, then, I called it to folks' attention. Why was it that way? And so, as a matter of fact, Clara Luper was one of the ones that came out there to Western Electric, to address wages, that were paid to people. And that was my first time working with her, as far as civil rights were concerned. But when I first went out there, I thought this is a horrible job, and I got sick the first day, and they sent me back home to go to the doctor. I had such a terrible migraine headache. I went to Dr. Charles Atkins, whose office was right there on Martin Luther King, and I had this little pink slip that they had given me, and they said, "Have your doctor fill this out when you're ready to come back to work." Well, I asked him when he thought I might be able to go back to work because I had the little slip that he needed to sign. And he asked me where I worked, and I said Western Electric. Well, he got right on the phone. I didn't know that the Urban League had been trying forever to get African Americans placed out there. And here I was out there when I didn't even go out there to seek a job. And he started pumping me with penicillin. He called the Urban League, and he told them that they needed to meet me. Nathaniel Johnson was executive director of the Urban League at the time. And he said, "I'm going to send her to talk to you, but I've got to get her well first, So the whole time I was out there at Western Electric, before I started moving around the country in the Bell system and making the strides that I did make, they were impressed that I should stay out there because it was bigger than I was. They kept telling me, "It's bigger than you, it's bigger than you. And you're a trailblazer, you're opening doors for others," and so that was true. But I'm telling you, it was kind of painful because there were many times when I felt like, well, this is it, this is where I came in, and I'm leaving. But I stayed because of Dr. Atkins' urgings and the many long talks that I had with Nathaniel Johnson, who was trying to get others placed at Western Electric. And eventually they did open the doors to the office staff, and I had to fight my way in there, because I was wanting to be in the computer field, and that was off limits to African Americans. So yes, I broke the glass ceiling up there on that too. So there have been many places in corporate America that I've been where trailblazing was the order of the day.
Yeah.
I know what that's like, but that wasn't part of what we thought we were training for or preparing ourselves for when we were in our segregated places.
So when you talk about being a trailblazer and not knowing that you were being a trailblazer, what were those feelings like, being one of the first and understanding that you almost have a whole race of people on your shoulders and you have to continue forward? Like, what's that?
I really hadn't thought about it at first when I first went out there, but as I said, when I got sick and Dr. Atkins and Nathaniel Johnson just kept it on my mind how important it was, then, it was because they kept reminding me that I stuck it out. I mean, it wasn't what I wanted to do, but they impressed upon me that it was bigger than I was, and that, I should do these things in order to prepare the way for others. And then later on in life, as I moved around the country and I went into positions in corporate America, I didn't just work for the Bell system. I worked for the U.S. Postal Service at one point. And when I stepped in there, I stepped in at the highest level that anybody had ever stepped in off the street, and they offered me lower positions, but by then I had learned a lot of lessons. And some of the lessons that I learned, and and I hope I'm not sounding like an ingrate at all, but during that time, it might have seemed even militant, if you will. But I recognized the field that I was in, that in many cases I was the only one, the only black person, the only female. So those two and I've had, managers or directors say, well, with Anita, we've got a twofer. I mean, they had nerve enough to say a twofer, meaning they had a black and a female. Wow. And so it was important to keep me. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, when I say I don't want to sound like an ingrate, but a lot of times in corporate America or in other places too, you're given the impression that somehow or another you don't really have that much to offer. And I say that's wrong. That is wrong. You should know your talents and your skills, and you should be able to negotiate like anybody else based on what your qualifications are. And I did. And I was successful at it, which is why I went to some of the highest levels in this country, because I wasn't buying that I was there just because of the color of my skin. I had something to put on the table. And so if I had something to put on the table, then surely you should be able to pay me for it. And so that's kind of how I went through my career.
So you mentioned you worked with Clara Luper with the pay wage gap. What was your experience like working with her? What was she like?
Oh, she was good to work with. She kind of impressed upon me that since she was from the outside coming in and I was already there on the job, she wanted me to give her, some perspective about what was going on inside the company, so that she would be on solid footing, when she, moved forward on it. And she worked with a guy who's still around here, Ross Williams. He was a union steward at that time. Mm-hmm. And so Ross worked with her on that because they were considering a strike, at the plant if they didn't get the kind of wages, the increase that they were asking for at that time.
Okay. So, backing up, how was your experience at Howard?
Oh, Howard was the first school I went to, and I went there because of the scholarship. It came as a cultural shock, the North versus the South, sort of, because that was one of the premier schools for African American. And see, I came straight from the country, and from Oklahoma, which was not too far removed from the country. And so my first shock was getting there with my matching socks and outfits. And they had an orientation for the freshman women, and they told us what the expectations were for Howard women. That's when I became rebellious. They said, they weren't talking to me particularly, but it struck me, they were calling my name. If you must wear those disgusting socks, wear some white ones. And I had all colors to go with all my outfits. So I wasn't listening to that, because I had already purchased these things. And so there were many rules that I just couldn't live with. And so after a while, I decided that, I needed to go back to Oklahoma. That's what I needed to do instead of being rebellious. And so I came back, and my mother was very disappointed, and she wanted to know what I was going to do next. And I thought, well, let me think about that. And so that's where Western Electric and all that. So I entered the workforce, and then I decided part of what my hesitation was at Howard. I was there on a scholarship, and back in those times, and that seems like a long time ago, and it is relative to you and others today, but they didn't have the vast number of opportunities in the market, in the job market. And so when the counselor was talking to me, she asked, what did I want to major in? Or what did I want to be? And so I said, well, I don't really know. She said, well, what do you like best? I said, math, which I did. I was great. I was great at math. And so she said, well, you can be a teacher. And I said, no, I will not be a teacher. So she said, you can be an accountant or a bookkeeper. And I could just see myself sitting on this tall stool with this little green visor across there. I said, nope, that won't work. And so she just went down the list, and said, well, what do you like next? And then, I said, I like to write. Well, you could be a reporter. I said, oh, that doesn't sound good. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to be paid. I don't want to live on, barely make it. I need to be paid for what I know. Yeah. And they didn't have the computer field then. They didn't have a whole lot of things that they have now. So it was either teacher or you become a nurse. I said, I can't stand the sight of blood. And so I started out as a psychology major, and I went to the first psychology course. And the professor stood up there and drew a line across the board, all the way across. And then he put these little marks, and he said, this is a timeline. You are right here, and you have to finish 4 years here, and then you have to do an internship here, you have to do this. And I was sitting there adding up my age plus all these. And I said, I'll be 31 years old before I get the first good check. I said, oh, this won't work. I mean, that was just the way I thought. Mm-hmm. And so since I was very undecided about it, I thought I need to sit down and think about this and quit wasting my time and other folks' money. And so I had an uncle whose sister lived in California, and uncle-in-law, and his sister came to visit him, and she was making money hand over fist. And he called me up because he knew I said, I'll go back to school just as soon as I discover what I'm supposed to do. I went over and I talked to her, and she was talking about this computer field and how they just made so much money, and she was just ringing my bell because I wanted to be paid good. And I asked, how do you get in the field? She said, you have to love math. She rang my bell. I went instantly, and I went to OSU Tech School. They were the only ones in Oklahoma that were offering computer courses. They were the first university to offer, and they were out on 10th Street. And so I went on Western Electric's tuition refund program, and graduated with honors on the President's Honor Roll, all of that sort of stuff. And my education continued from there. And so I did well in the computer field, and I stepped in high places and, did a lot of important things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Were you involved in any type? So you mentioned that you were married and grown when you became aware of civil rights activism. Did you become involved in any of the activism taking place in the state?
No, because number one, I was married. I had one child when Miss Luper, I was aware that she had started. I had one child that was born the same year she started it. So no, I wasn't. I was into my family, at that time. I think over the years, she led a lot of marches. I was certainly aware of them. She was integrating parks. She was integrating restaurants. She was going to other cities, doing the same thing. She was working with unions. She was doing a lot, in civil rights. And so they had, after the I think it was the the young girls that were killed in the church bombing. She did a march downtown. Well, I participated in that because that just burned me up that those children, were bombed like that. So I did march, but see, there's something about me that says if you hit me, I might hit you back, And I said, I don't want to disrupt her nonviolent march.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did march, but I certainly had an attitude. And, of course, whites were standing on the sidewalks looking at us and all that. And I thought, no, don't come over here because the fight will start, But they didn't. They were on their side of the street, and we marched, and there was, nothing that looked like violence. And I never was one to take to that too kindly. I did come face to face with it in South Carolina. I lived in South Carolina just prior to the birth of, before my son. My son was born in South Carolina. We were living down there then. And that was the first time I'd seen this ugly stuff called segregation, which I didn't understand because they had communities where the only thing that separated blacks and white was just the line in the center of the street, because whites live on that side of the street and blacks live on the other side, and you better not cross over there. And so I was forever, my husband was in the service, and at the PX, I was forever being confronted with these little things that weren't written down, but they, practiced. Like somebody cutting in front of me in line at the PX, and I'm getting ready to pay for my stuff. And I just said, oh no, honey, the line is back there. So I was a one woman person directing traffic in my life, And so there were times when, folk would say, well, no, I said, well, yes. And so my husband thought it was very dangerous, because my attitude wasn't what they were expecting, around in South Carolina. But that's my living in South Carolina during that time. And that's where I lived in the little town where Senator James Clyburn is from.
Okay.
I lived in that little town, and I knew his family. But they were doing terrible things when I got down there. When I said that, my husband was in the Air Force, and 2 weeks after I was there, they sent him off somewhere in the woods where nobody could know where he was and all that. So I used to go down to a little recreation center there in the area where we lived and play cards and dominoes. I went down there one day and everybody was sitting around the table looking sad, and they act like they didn't want to play, and I was asking what the deal was. And so a friend of theirs, African American, was being electrocuted for a crime he did not commit, and everybody knew it. That was before interracial marriages, and so he had been seeing this white lady, quite honestly, and he thought that was dangerous and that he should break it off. She didn't want to break it off. So she begged and pleaded for him to come one more time. And as soon as he got over there, she hollered rape. And they did, in fact, electrocute him. And that was my first confrontation with horror. I just, that just got on my last good nerve.
Mm-hmm. What did incidents like that, and you're faced with segregation there, what did that make you feel?
It made me feel outrage. That's what it made me feel. And as a matter of fact, when I was riding the train down to South Carolina, they had these little traditions where blacks didn't sit on one car, you sit back there and there was no air conditioning. I wasn't into that. And I sat down and I tell you the truth, there were several times on that trip where if I had been there long enough, it would have been a riot or something, because I refused, and so on this one change that I made, I was so burned up because I was wanting to ask a question. The question was, what track is the train coming in on so I could get there? And so this guy, when he said, get over there. And I said, but I just wanted to ask the question, which track is the train coming on? And he kept saying, go over there. I didn't see anything over there. So I just said, well, in the interest of time, because the train was coming, I ran down this, it was a pole, it was a black pole, and I ran down this side, and then I came down this other side, and it was him. He said, now what was the question? That was the kind of insidious stuff that was going on. I would have shown out, but the train was there, so I didn't take it too kindly. I readily admit that, I wasn't the perfect one to, put my jaw up there and get it slapped on this side and then turn the other one. No, I wasn't cut out like that.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So you weren't a turn the other cheek type of?
No, not really. Only if it was nonviolent, I might turn the other cheek, but not too much, because if it wasn't right, it just wasn't right. It's the difference between right and wrong, and so later on I learned that man's inhumanity to man can be so awful, and I've gotten into pushing contests, with folk. They'll push you off the sidewalk because the umbrella, they don't want you under the umbrella walking in the rain. I just push right back. This umbrella is big enough for both of us, like that. And they didn't get violent. They just looked at me like, well, poor thing, she doesn't know better.
Yeah.
I guess I'll deal with her and suffer on down the sidewalk under the umbrella with her. But it's crazy stuff that people do.
Yeah.
But I've never, and I have to say that my grandfather is an influence on me because everybody knew he stood for right. And so they respected that. And so he didn't take anything off of people and they respected him. They really did. But I do know the difference, between, nonviolent. You see Gandhi right there. He's one of my most favorite people that I looked up to, because Gandhi was right about, his drive for civilization.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King was too.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Martin Luther King came to our college campus at Howard. That was one of the highlights of my stay at Howard. He came, but he wasn't famous then. He was on his way to becoming famous. And I saw his brilliance then.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Wow. So what was it like him visiting your campus? What did he talk about?
Well, they had just, Rosa Parks, who I also met, had just refused to get off the bus. See, I'm a Rosa Parks type person.
Mm-hmm. Civil disobedience.
Well, yeah, if you want to call it that. Not all laws are right.
Mm-mm.
They're all man-made.
Mm-hmm.
I always went off of it. It didn't fall from heaven, so don't tell me, that it's right just because you said it's right.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, he talked about this awesome responsibility he had, since Rosa Parks had made her move and wouldn't get off the bus. And that was really the signal for a massive civil rights movement here in America. And he was very young. He was brilliant. You could see that, and I mean, he was very much into the Bible and what the Bible said. Uh, and he reminded us that the Bible said you're supposed to love your enemy. He said didn't say anything about liking them, and I was that was good. I was good with that. I said, okay, I'll love them from a distance or whatever. But I remember he said he didn't say anything about you had to like them, but you must love them. You must love everybody.
Yeah.
So that was the thing, and so I had a chance. I almost missed him, because at the time when I was in Howard, I kept questioning what's the difference between me and Dwight Eisenhower, who was the president. And I simply, in my little mind, said, oh, he plays golf and I don't. But I felt like I could do whatever I wanted to do, whatever I thought that I could do. And so as a president, like, what's to keep you from becoming president of the United States? That was the question. And I guess women are asking that right now. You have women running now. But I was asking the question when I was 17 years old at Howard University. Mm-hmm. But and Queen Elizabeth came to the campus. She had just become queen. And everybody went to the parade, except me and my three friends who stayed in the dormitory and decided we wanted to play cards. We didn't want to go down there. That was unrealistic and mm-hmm. all that. That's how we thought. Mm-hmm. But then when Martin Luther King came to the campus, instead of me dismissing him like that, everybody was buzzing about this Martin Luther King. Well, I also didn't want to miss anything that I thought was just really great. And so I got up early, and it's a good thing because we just barely got in on the back row in the chapel. Everybody else had to watch in the library on the screen, on the monitor. Wow. And so I had a chance to meet him, and he shook hands with all of us and all that. Awesome. So I told him how great he was. Yeah. I could see his brilliance.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, you've talked so beautifully about education, the role of education, knowledge is power, and kind of how that became so ingrained in you mm-hmm. that you left the community and did all these great things. So when you think about the state of education now, especially the state of education for Black students,
yes,
how would you talk about that?
It's sad. It's a very, very sad story. As a matter of fact, I was just telling someone yesterday the same story that I told Janet Barisi, who was state superintendent of education before the current superintendent, Joy Hoffmeister. I said, Oklahoma in education reminds me of a trip that I took to China. I went with a group to China, and when we got there, Madam Wu, who was a big advocate of education in China, had to flee to the countryside, when Mao became chairman of China, because no one was allowed to go to school. And for 10 years, nobody could go to school. So she talked about the issue associated with generations lost because they couldn't go to school. I don't see that as being too different than Oklahoma, because we have several generations that fell through the crack. They don't know how to do a lot of things that we knew how to do. They don't know how to be a parent, for example. And you've got, young people raising children, you've got incarceration and all that sort of stuff. And you've got generations lost. From the time that I graduated up until about the 70s, the early 70s, everything was rocking along pretty good, even though they were sending up these trial balloons for integration around here at that time. They couldn't come to grips with whether it was going to be the finger plan or what plan they were going to do. Well, in the meantime, from 1970 on, students were not getting the education that they should have been getting. There were just too many politics involved. And so, fast forward to today, we haven't bridged the gap between those generations, and we have not done a good job in providing education, good education, and it should be good, it should be excellent for all children. Our children are deprived and they are blamed. They are victims, but they are blamed. It's blaming the victim. And the parents, they're in the same boat. They don't know what they don't know. You know, you can't do anything that you don't know to do. And if you've never been exposed, if you've never been trained, and you've been left out, then you're going to behave whichever way you behave. You know, so Janet Barisi agreed with me. And she said, well, what do you think it takes? I say it takes everybody rolling up their sleeves and knowing that it's hard work, but this is something that you have to do. That's what they did in China. Madam Wu told us they had day school, they had night school, they had after school, they had in school, they had, Saturday school, and yet, sadly, some people were left behind. But the effort proved to be good, because when we were there, what we saw in education and among young people, it was remarkable. I mean, I did not expect to go into a fourth grade classroom, see a fourth grade class running a bank in the school. And I'm not talking about they were using play money. They were using what might be your allowance to go to the teller. The teller, a fourth grader, would receive the money, account for the money, and give them back, the receipt for the goods. I did not expect to see a fifth grade class running the generator system for the school, providing lights and heat and air to the school. But that's what I saw at the fourth and fifth grade levels over there. And some of the student performances we saw, you would have thought they were practicing for the Olympics, but that was just ordinary. And so I said, we got a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And so I've seen firsthand, from my worldly travels, and I've traveled a lot, how we fare in the world where education is concerned. When President Obama first took office, there was a book that came out which gave our standing in the world. It's called The Flat World in Education. I've got a copy of it. And, I tried to talk to some folk around here about the flat world in education and our international standings and even looking at our national standing in the Kids Count magazine that they send out to us all the time. It's sad. Something can be done about it, but the ones who are making the decisions for the most part have not. I don't think they knew anything really about education to make good education decisions. And so how can you not know, enough about education to make intelligent decisions about what children need and that sort of stuff? That's why you saw teachers on strike here in Oklahoma. That's why you saw teachers running for political office, because those sitting up there making those decisions were not prepared. They were not prepared to make a decision about something they didn't know anything about or very little about.
Yeah.
And so that's still sort of an issue.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add about segregation in Oklahoma or anything?
I think there is a ray of hope, for Oklahoma. I had nerve enough to leave corporate America to come back to people said, why did you come back here? I mean, you had it going on, which I did. I was doing everything that most folk dreamed about doing. Travel, you name it. I felt like I needed to get back to Oklahoma because that's where my education started at Douglas High School. And I felt like I should come back and offer my time and talent to correct some of these problems around here. And the problems are vast. I do have some solutions, and I'm proud of the work that we've done over here through Black Liberated Arts Center. I never thought that I would be doing what I'm doing here, but here I am. And maybe that's the purpose anyway. Because I told you I was a real estate broker. And I came back here and I was going to, do all of these wonderful things in real estate. And I was doing a lot of that. And I was doing it, I thought, for the sake of my children. I had gone to the attorney and, this property belongs to this one and this one, like that. And I was buying real estate and selling real estate. That was quite an experience too.
Yeah.
But my children let me know that I should go for myself because they were not interested in what my thought was for them on that. And so I left it alone because I met other people who had tried to do for their children and they didn't ask their children, what would you like?
Yeah.
What is your dream?
Yeah.
So I've invested in my children rather than in property. And I'm investing in my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren at this point. I had 2 little great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And they're both under 2 years old. And so I want to make sure that they get what's real important to me, which is education.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me today. I learned so much from you.
But we didn't talk about Ada Lois.
Do you know them? Like, do you know any of these fallen women? Clara Luper, Nancy Randolph Davis, or Ada Lois Scipio Fisher?
Yes, I knew Clara Luper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, up until she died.
Okay.
And when I was in real estate, of course, I did a lot of work with Marilyn, her daughter, because she was in insurance business.
Okay.
And so, yes, I knew Miss Luper. In fact, one of the greatest compliments I ever had was Miss Luper told me several times before she got sick and ultimately passed that I was doing a good job. She kept telling me, I'd see her at the post office, she said, you're doing a good job. You're doing a really good, and that was really encouraging, because, on the history books, people say, well, why are you writing a history book? I said, somebody has to write our history. It's time we start writing our own history.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I think I have something to say about that. And so Mrs. Luper, I knew her very well and went to her youngest daughter's wedding, and I know that family. I know a lot of people here in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really knew Dr. Fisher. I know Bruce because, with the History Center, I helped him out a lot in getting that up off the ground and doing some work. And we've done a lot of things together, Bruce and I have. So I kind of feel like I know his mother, but I didn't really. I did know Mrs. Davis.
Okay.
Nancy Randolph Davis. I did know her before she died. I was looking at their profiles, I guess, and interesting, these 3 women were friends, and Clara Luper was the oldest one
Mm-hmm.
of them, and Nancy Davis was the youngest one, and they all had that the passion, their persistence, and certainly the commitment, to do what they did, and they opened doors. I mean, I doubt very seriously that I could have exactly. Well, it was years later entered OSU, because even at OSU, when I made the President's Honor Roll, it was a good old boys kind of fraternal honor society. And I said, but I made the President's Honor Roll. Well, you can't be on there.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a boy. You're not a guy. But I mean, I was out there at OSU, and I was the only female in the class the whole time I was out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I think there was one lady that started out, but she didn't last very long. She was from the library system. She was a white lady. But I went all the way through, and in many cases, I was the only black person in class at OSU. But certainly, Mrs. Davis's, trailblazing work
Mm-hmm.
made the opportunity a lot more accessible to me.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Ada Lois Fisher, because I did some graduate work down at OU, and certainly her pioneering efforts accounted for the fact that I could just go down there and enroll, and decide for myself, which way to go.
I definitely cite Nancy Davis as a pioneer for even myself,
Mm-hmm.
being a black female at Oklahoma State University. And so I think that's why that is my connection with her, and that's why it's so strong, because I think if it weren't for her, where would I be in
That's
my
right. That's
doctoral
correct.
studies? And so I have a very strong tie to her,
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned the fact that they were all three friends, and knowing they all went to Langston, it just makes me
That's right.
wonder what's in the water at Langston. Like, what is that environment like to breed such pioneers and such trailblazers as they leave? It's
Well, the same thing that was in the water at Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
You had people at the top at that time, because I didn't check this, but I wouldn't be surprised. Edmund Page was president of Langston University, I think, when Mr. Moon was when he was deciding which way he was going in life. Because he started out as an insurance man and went into education, but he had a dream and a vision which he lived out.
Yeah.
But Edmund Page and his daughter Zia Bro, Mrs. Bro, they were genius. They were pure genius, and they all had the same heart and passion that Mr. Moon had, and they passed it on. Mr. Moon passed it on, and it gets back down to the generations that were lost because the baton wasn't passed on and on. But they knew, Clara Luper knew, Ada Lois Fisher knew, and so did Nancy Davis, that it was incumbent upon them to pass it on and to keep it moving forward.
Yeah.
That's why you, as a student, must do the same thing.
Yes.
And so we each play a part in that pay it forward idea, for other generations, for future generations.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, not at this time. I've got tons of stories, so.
I mean, if you want to tell them, go ahead.
No. I'll save some for another day.
Okay.
But I've had a pretty good life, even though this part of my life has been the most difficult, and it sounds negative, but I always say having come back here. See, I was fantasizing when I was up here in New Jersey, talking about coming back and giving back. When I first met it, I said, I didn't mean suck the marrow from my bones, but the experiences here in Oklahoma are so challenging that if you leave, you'll fly.
Mm-hmm.
You'll do great because of that work ethic, because of the challenge that you've met and overcome here. It'll seem easy. I never had a problem when I worked in Washington, D.C. as an adult. I never had a problem when I worked in, New Jersey.
Yeah.
I didn't have, I was able to achieve a whole lot more and realize my potential without all of these things confronting you.
Wow.
And that's a sad statement to make about Oklahoma, but that accounts for this long period of what they call the brain drain, because they couldn't understand why people would graduate from whatever college and go somewhere else. Because, quite simply put, this is my own words, it's the school of hard knocks where it's unnecessarily difficult. All of that difficulty is unnecessary. But when you go other places, you've been prepared. And so you don't have a problem. And if they just think about it and look around, they'll see that other people who leave here and go up, they soar. They don't end up as bag men or bag women on the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you make it here, you can make it anywhere.
That gives me hope.
Well, look, the opportunity is there and you're well prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not an issue. It's not an issue.
Yeah.
But we have cultural challenges here that we have to overcome that we still haven't. We do some things that looks like, but deep down, it's not it's not all that it's cracked up to be, as some would say.
Right.
And some of the things that people say or do, and some of the legislation that's being put in place, it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me started on these guns around here. Being able to carry a gun without a permit.
You're asking for mass shootings, in my opinion.
You're asking for a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
My mother's 98 years old, and she went in the nail shop out at one of the malls here. And there was a man sitting up in there getting his nails done, and his gun was in his back pocket, and everybody was sitting there scared in the nail shop. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Can't even enjoy simple things like
No. I've had the experience when Luby's cafeteria was open. I was up there one day having a late lunch, and this man comes in packing his pistol. And you should have seen everybody in the cafeteria. They didn't know what to do because they didn't know what he was going to do. That's the thing. That's the craziness about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal? We're not shooting bears in the wood and hunting for rabbits and squirrels and stuff, anymore. So what's all of this madness? It's madness.
Why is it necessary?
It's not necessary. It gets down to the school of hard knocks where it's unnecessarily difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway.
The state we live in, man.
I hate to say it. Mother says, well, you get all these problems with Oklahoma. I said, I don't have a problem with the dirt and the soil around here. I said, these two-legged creatures walking around here. It's the two-legged creatures that are the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not politically correct, but it is indeed, a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And I noticed that there's not much courage around here either sometimes.
Yeah.
And see, those three women displayed an extraordinary amount of courage.
Yeah. And that's kind of what this study is about, kind of just highlighting how three ordinary women
Mm-hmm.
displayed a level of courage that completely transformed democracy here
That's
in the
right.
state.
That's correct.
And to me, that's powerful because when I look at that, I look at myself and I'm thinking like that. What that says to me is that I can display that level of courage and make
Mhm.
change as well.
That's right.
And I want to do my due diligence in getting this story out for other Black females, or not even just Black females, just others in general,
That's right.
to see how we can evoke change through just courage, having the courage to say, this is not right, and I'm not going to just abide by these laws anymore. Right. And I just think that their stories and these stories, your story, is important to preserve and just kind of show like we're still living in an era where things are not all right.
That's right.
We've progressed, but we haven't progressed the way that we should. So there's still work to be done. And in my opinion, I like learning from women like you and Clara and Ada and Nancy to figure out how I can make a lasting change the way they have. And in some ways make this state, this world better for later generations, you know? So that's why I just feel like it's so important to capture these stories and preserve them because, like you said, there is a lost generation. And if we let the ones from those generations in the past die off, then we're never going to be able to learn from you all. And
that's correct.
So,
yeah, that's why the recording of the history and the preservation of the history.
It's important.
It's very important.
Yeah.
It's quite important. And if you don't, I mean, you're going to look up, I mean, it can be as simple as I was attending an alumni meeting, Douglas alumni meeting, and I was looking around the table and I said, I'm not coming back down here until you do better. And what are you talking about? I said, you know, every time I come down here to a meeting, you know, somebody's died. I said, you don't have any young people. Mm-hmm. One of these days, all of you old heads will be sitting around this table and it'll be down to two. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, it's me and you. Now, what are we going to do? They took heed. And so they put a lot of you. And the last time I went, I said, this is very refreshing. You got young people at the table, you're paying it forward. Mm-hmm. But to sit here and look and, you know, and keep it to yourself.
Yeah, we got to stop doing that.
You got to stop doing it. You got to pass it on. You got to pay it forward.
Yeah.
And keep it moving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Oh, I enjoyed talking to you today. You were so refreshing to speak with.
Well, thank you.
No problem. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your Saturday to talk with me and do this interview. So much good information.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.